Lovely Thursday afternoon here from Market in Finland. My name is Reetta Karjalainen, and I'm very happy to open this exciting webinar about the very trendy and new metahype theme. And this webinar is called Unpacking the Metahype, and we have a pleasure to have Mr. David Jones, the founder of and the CEO of the Brandtech group, with us, telling us more about this theme. So, David, you're very welcome, and you can start. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And it's afternoon in Finland. It's early morning in New York, but I'm thrilled to be with you. And I'm going to spend the next 40-45 minutes just taking you through a whistle-stop tour of what's going on with everything to do with the metaverse and Web3 and NFTs. And then just quickly by way of background, so the Brandtech group, we do two things. We help the world's biggest brands do their marketing better, faster, and cheaper using technology. So we're the biggest global digital content partner for some of the world's biggest companies. And as part of that, we also invest in really interesting companies in and around the latest and greatest in technology. So our first big metaverse investment was back in 2015, where we were one of the first very first investors in Niantic, who created Pokemon Go, and today one of the leading metaverse companies. But over the years, we've done 7 or 8 investments in companies from blockchain to metaverse to avatars, and a lot of what I'm going to talk to you about today comes from that. So buckle up, here goes. I'm going to kick off with an unfair video, and this is Steve Ballmer, global CEO of Microsoft. Steve Jobs has just unveiled the iPhone. It's 2007, the end of 2007. And Steve Ballmer is asked, like, what do you think of the iPhone? And this is what he has to say.
Steve, let me ask you about the iPhone and the Zune, if I may. The Zune was getting some traction, and Steve Jobs goes to Macworld and he pulls out this iPhone. What was your first reaction when you saw that?
$500 fully subsidized with a plan. I said, that is the most expensive phone in the world, and it doesn't appeal to business customers because it doesn't have a keyboard, which makes it not a very good email machine.
Now, obviously, that hasn't been aged particularly well, but the 3 points I'd make around this video. The first one is everything that you now say today in a public forum is recorded, so be careful about being so categoric. But I think the 2 more important points is, firstly, when he said that, most people thought he was right. You know, Apple was worth a few billion, they'd had a flop with the Newton, and most people kind of thought, yeah, no, he's actually probably right. And I think the reason they thought he was right, and it's probably the most important contextual point for the whole of today, is that when the iPhone was launched, it was good, but you know, it was a phone with a music player and a camera, but it wasn't particularly, you know, game changing. What made it game changing was the ecosystem of apps that grew up around it. So the fact that you could order an Uber or book your flight or buy anything on Amazon or stay in touch with, you know, your entire family or watch series or do anything you wanted in your pocket. And it's that ecosystem that is going to determine whether, you know, the ecosystem that grows up around the metaverse is going to determine whether this is, you know, a few 100 million gamers kind of sitting on their sofas at home playing games, or the most important technological revolution of the 21st century. Now, I wrote a blog in January entitled "The Metaverse is a Giant Overhyped Nothing Burger with No Future," and clearly that was a clickbait headline. I don't believe that. I think it has an enormous future despite all the hype. But what I put in this blog was the Google search terms around metaverse, and what you see on the left there is it kind of goes from nothing to just totally off the charts, and it led to the New York Times saying, well, is the metaverse just marketing? And I think the one thing you can debate where we are on the hype curve. You can't debate the fact that there is enormous hype around this space. Personally, I think we're pretty close to the peak of inflated expectations, where everybody thinks the technology is going to change the world, then everyone's super disappointed because it doesn't, and then a couple of years later it all comes back. And this is just to demonstrate that, you know, when I did my first talk about 18 months ago, 2 years ago, around metaverse, it was really hard to find examples. This is just 1 week back in April of the world's biggest brands and companies talking about what they're doing in the space. And I think the thing I would say is, because people are often kind of different in their views. Some like believe it's absolutely the future. Some are totally cynical and think it's the latest idiot magnet. And what I always say is, look, you personally may think this is nothing. But when the world's biggest media company, Facebook, has changed its name to Meta, when the world's second biggest company, Microsoft, has said it's the future of work and has acquired Activision Blizzard in the biggest deal in the history of technology, when the world's biggest sporting company, Nike, have bought Artifact and said it's the future of sport, when the world's biggest gaming company have said it's the future of gaming, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, when the world's trillion-dollar companies are betting this is the future, then personally you might think it's stupid, but professionally you need to have a strategy. There's kind of been a race of people trying to work out, what is the size and scale of this whole area. You've had, everyone from back in December, it was only $800 billion, according to Bloomberg. JP Morgan came out in February this year saying, no, actually it's $1 trillion. Morgan Stanley were like, no, it's actually $8 trillion, and that's in China alone. And Citibank have kind of doubled down on it. It's even more than that. But I think the one thing, like, no one has any idea, but the one thing that is clear is the potential is huge. And what I'm going to do now is just unpack a little virtual culture, NFTs, and the metaverse. But before I do that, and again, another core kind of anchoring point, we're really at a very embryonic stage with all of this. So those of you who may be old enough like me to remember Newtons and Palm Pilots, I bought these things super excitedly. I unpacked them. They were terrible. I put them back on the shelf and never used them again. A few years later, Steve Jobs creates the iPhone and the world changes. And I think it's important to understand, like, we're very much at this Newton Palm Pilot. Someone is going to come along and crack the equivalent of the iPhone and the world will change. Now, one of the first uses of the term metaverse was in the trial between Apple and Epic. Epic, who owned Fortnite, were in a court battle with Apple because they were saying, look, it's unfair that that Apple take 30% of our App Store sales because we're not a real world platform, we're a metaverse platform. And the court reporter was like, well, what's one of those?
I'm sorry to interrupt, but your presentation isn't actually going forward. We only have this one picture. It's kind of frozen.
So let me go back and start again then. That's
yeah. We are having some technical difficulties. Terribly sorry about this.
Let me try.
That's how it is sometimes.
Hang on one second. So, yeah, I would highly recommend using Zoom or Teams next time.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I know.
Moving now?
Yeah, now we have this picture of a guy.
Okay, so I'll just catch up by showing you this so you get the context. So this is what I was talking about. This is Steve Ballmer. He is the CEO of Microsoft. Steve Jobs just unveiled the iPhone, and this is what he has to say. And please shout if you can't hear the video.
Steve, let me ask you about the iPhone and the Zune, if I may. The Zune was getting some traction, and Steve Jobs goes to Macworld and he pulls out this iPhone. What was your first reaction when you saw that?
$500 fully subsidized with a plan. I said, that is the most expensive phone in the world, and it doesn't appeal to business customers because it doesn't have a keyboard, which makes it not a very good email machine.
So the point I made before, look, most people thought he was right when he said that. The reason that they thought he was right was Apple was a pretty small company, but we didn't understand the potential of this. And it's literally the ecosystem that's going to grow up around the metaverse, which is going to determine whether it's, the equivalent of the Palm Pilot or the Newton, as I talked about, or whether it's the most important technological revolution of the 21st century. I talked enormously about the hype that's going on, but importantly, you can't dismiss the hype because the world's biggest companies, from Facebook to Microsoft to Nike to Electronic Arts, are saying that this is the future. The world's biggest banks are saying that it's going to be huge. And then I was just sharing the fact that, in my opinion, I think we're very much at the Newton Palm Pilot stage. So, when Steve Ballmer was dismissive of the iPhone, he was dismissive because this was the context we were living in, and no one really thought that this thing was going to be game changing. And obviously that ecosystem that built up around it, that allowed you to completely do everything and run your lives out of your pocket, changed the world. And then just to catch up, in this court trial between Apple and Epic, when Epic was saying it's unfair that Apple have 30% of our real world sales, they said, well, actually, we're not a real world company, we're a metaverse company. And the court reporter was like, well, what's one of those? And the answer was, it's a virtual world for socializing and entertainment. And then we saw everything from the source code of the World Wide Web being sold as an NFT by Tim Berners-Lee for over 5 million, to at the other end of the spectrum, a 12-year-old boy making £300,000 selling NFTs of digital whale art. And it led to us understanding that there was this incredibly fast-growing giant economy, all made possible by NFTs. Now, I share this example, I'm sure most of you know it, but I share it because I think it was one of the first examples when we realized something really interesting is happening here. So this is NBA Top Shots. Dapper Labs worked with the NBA, and they created NFTs of little videos of a LeBron James dunk, a Steph Curry three-pointer, and they put them up for sale. And as you can see, people were spending $250,000, $300,000 to buy these. Now, on one level, this makes no sense. We can go and look at these on YouTube for free now. So why would somebody spend $250,000 wanting to own the NFT? And the answer is not dissimilar to, say, the art world. Why would somebody possibly want to buy an original Keith Haring or Andy Warhol painting? You can buy a postcard, you can buy a poster, you can go and look at it on the internet. And the answer is because someone believes that has inherent value, owning the original. And it's exactly the same thing here. Whether they are right or not, they believe that by owning that original, that's going to have huge inherent value in the future. And we're going to see, people make a lot of money, and we're going to see people lose a lot of money. Then Shopify started saying, look, we're going to actually support NFT sales. And I think what's interesting about this slide, this is the rankings. CryptoSlam rank NFTs by dollar value in sales, and this is from about a year ago. And you can see that NBA Top Shot is at the top with 600 million. And then fast forward to this month, and the NBA is still doing well, but it's a billion plus. But Axie Infinity and Bored Ape and CryptoPunks, I mean, these franchises are doing $4 billion of sales in under a year, and those are getting into some quite big numbers. What then happened earlier this year is 3 of these franchises came together. So Yuga Labs, who created Bored Apes, bought CryptoPunks and Meebits. So you've got sort of, those 3 franchises now at $6-7 billion in sales. But I think, we're living very much, I call this kind of the both and world. It's both unbelievably overhyped and, an enormous opportunity for the future. You've got people who are both complete experts at it, like Yoga Labs, and we've talked about what they did with Bored Ape, and, messing up. So they did their other side NFT sales. They sold $561 million of NFTs in 24 hours, but they totally messed up, because one of the things that actually happens if you have a big success when you're selling your NFTs is that the demand becomes so high that the gas fees, the fees you need to pay to mint your NFT, go through the roof. And so people were spending $3,300 of transaction fees to buy a $25 NFT. And the huge backlash against Yoga Labs, and people said, they were slammed for their nightmare tone deaf response to all of this. And obviously the hype, kind of continues. Logan Paul is quite a famous influencer, talking about the big mistake he'd made, the $623,000 he spent on an NFT and is worthless. And rather than just using that as a learning, he then seeks to profit from it and I've made 99 originals and you can buy them. And I just thought this response to that tweet was funny. Man starting to wonder if he shouldn't have invested his life savings in an imaginary token, saying he owns a digital painting of a cartoon monkey. And you've seen a lot of these kind of, wow, this seems great, and then the implosion. So Jack Dorsey's first tweet sold for $2.9 million as an NFT. Someone who bought that thought they were making a very shrewd investment. They put it up for sale at 48 million. The top bid was 280. So they're not feeling quite so clever about that now. But you've got big companies like Salesforce basically saying that this is a huge part of the future of B2B, and actually launching an entire Salesforce cloud for crypto. We've obviously seen over the last few months, whether you want to call it the crypto winter, the crypto meltdown, so Coinbase tumbling to record lows, NFT sales falling off a cliff. OpenSea, the biggest NFT platform, laying off 20% of its staff. So you could conclude that, well, actually we can ignore and forget all of this. But I think the thing, I love this quote because I think it sums it up nicely. If 2022 is 1999, crypto is pets.com and the metaverse is the internet. And I remember I launched Australia's first digital agency back in the late 90s, and then the .com collapse happened. There was like, oh, the internet's dead. And it's like, well, no, it isn't. Like bad .com business models are dead, but the internet is a very different thing. You know, back then, this is 2000, the Daily Mail saying the internet may just be a passing fad as millions give up on it. And I think we know that that's not quite the case. Now, one of the biggest and most real manifestations of the metaverse is in gaming. And what's going on in the world today is gaming culture is actually driving culture. So the biggest global events now take place in game, whether that's Travis Scott's Fortnite concert that attracted 45 million viewers, or Lil Nas's Roblox concert with 33 million. I get those goosebumps every time. I need the hype. Go that to the and the king of the metaverse is Snoop. So, he released his Stashbox NFTs that did 45 million sales in 6 days. He released the first ever music video set entirely in the metaverse, and you can see there his avatar. He's opened a Bored Ape restaurant, and I love this kind of marketing word salad. It's the first immersive retail dessert experience. He's even been shown he's funny in Web 2 as well as Web 3 when Elon Musk pulled out of buying Twitter, saying that he might have to buy Twitter now, and Elon Musk liking that. And then he and Eminem performed the Bored Ape song at the MTV Awards. And I'll just show you a little bit of that. But the MTV Awards, if you didn't see them a few weeks ago, it really was a kind of whole celebration of metaverse. But actually, it was fine, but it wasn't particularly amazing. It was kind of like a concert with their avatars. I think often people are dismissive of gaming. There's almost 3 billion gamers in the world today, and we talked a lot about Microsoft's acquisition of Activision Blizzard, biggest deal in the history of technology, and we kind of gloss over the fact that Minecraft has now passed 1 trillion views on YouTube. That said, Minecraft has taken a very clear position on NFTs, saying, look, we're going to ban them. We're not going to allow them on our platform, and it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. Roblox, one of my personal favorite companies, 30, 40 billion market cap, 40 million games having been created by people on the platform, over half of all under 18-year-olds in North America on it. As this says, if Roblox daily users were a country, they'd be bigger than Canada. And I like to say that if TikTok's the new Amazon, then Roblox is the new TikTok. They've just released their new advertising formats. So you see the poster, it takes you into an experience. So you can actually go in, this is in the Vans experience, but then you actually go back into Roblox when you've finished. So look, with all this going on, what should you be doing in the metaverse and with NFTs? And I think often it's easier to say what you shouldn't be doing than what you should. So firstly, not this. Don't just turn your product into an NFT and put it on OpenSea. And we saw a wave of these examples in the early years. People go, oh my God, we can turn our soup into an NFT and sell it. Let's do that. Bottom right, Charmin toilet paper, the #1 brand of toilet paper in North America. Why would somebody want to own an NFT of toilet paper? And the answer is they didn't, so no one bought them. And simply don't open up a space that seems sad and lonely. As this cartoon says, I'm sure consumers will show up any minute now. This was Miller's virtual bar to show the first ever Super Bowl spot being shown in the metaverse. And I think you'll agree with me that as we go into this bar and have a little look, if we walked into a bar in the real world that looked like that, we would walk straight back out. So yeah, it's great to do things like this. It's great to say we're going to do the first ever, but think about how you're getting audience there. As we see the very desolate and empty bar. Likewise, this example where Chipotle's experience in the metaverse kind of left me hungry and confused. We recently hired Mark Darcy to join our team. For 10 years, he was the chief creative officer at Meta or Facebook, and he summed this up by saying, if you build it, they won't come. But I think we are seeing really interesting examples. One of the early ones was Gap. They were selling NFT hoodies, but the NFT hoodie came with a real one that you could go and pick up in store, so driving in store traffic. Budweiser really demonstrated they understood the kind of Web3 ethos. They used the glasses noun in their Super Bowl spot. Now, what's interesting about this, again, it's one of those kind of upside down moments, if you like, where the Nouns Collective had spent $394,000 buying this noun, and they allowed Budweiser to use it for free. Now, the conditions were that they would put it in their Super Bowl spot and they would make it their profile picture. But in the old world, the brand would have had to spend a bunch of money to get something. In this new world, it's being given it. And again, why? Because the Nouns Collective believe that if more and more brands want to get hold of nouns and use nouns, that it will actually build a lot of value. Utility is one of the biggest and most important things with any technology, and it's easy to understand why, in the used car market, having a record on the blockchain through an NFT of exactly who has owned a car could be a very compelling thing. We've also had people start to experiment with, actually, let's have NFTs and we'll actually use and cast them in our TV commercials. I think community is a really big part of it as well. A lot of people don't think about community when they're doing this, and obviously one of the biggest communities is the Bored Ape community. Monkey Shoulder, a Scotch whiskey, produced 1,500 bottles with Bored Apes on them. If you owned a Bored Ape, you got a bottle for free and the NFT for free. If you didn't, you could buy it. And actually 10 lucky people got their own Bored Ape put on the bottle. And we've seen a lot going on in the fashion space. So whether it's Ralph Lauren debuting a fashion line, on the right is their collaboration with a Korean K-pop band that they put out on Zepeto, which sold several million. Spotify jumped into Roblox with Spotify Island, and again, interestingly, allowed their creators to share in the proceeds for anything they sold. Samsung recently launched their kind of metaverse playground, Space Tycoon, and already 10 million people in a few weeks have actually been there. And this week, huge announcement from Walmart about everything they're going to be doing in the metaverse with a big Roblox effort and a lot of virtual merchandising. And I think often particularly when it comes to Roblox, you've got a kind of a spectrum. I think often people think they have to go immediately in and build some giant space. You don't. You can put your toe in the water and sell some digital products. Then if you're kind of getting more interested in more traction, maybe do a pop-up experience and collaborate with someone who already has a community and an audience in Roblox. And then finally, if all of that is working well, then do a persistent space. And I think we've got the world very much divided into two at the moment. You have the Web2 platforms who have a high user base, and you have the Web3 platforms who are on the blockchain and Web3, but don't have too many users yet. And it's going to be interesting to see if anybody is able to get up into that, top right quadrant, who's going to be first there. I'm also seeing some really interesting things from Finnish companies. We had a quick look because we were coming here. Ren's a super interesting example. And we talked about the Gap hoodie. Ren's have actually introduced the first physical and virtual hoodie. Helsinki became the world's first virtual city and invited everybody to explore and get to know the city through the metaverse. And then a really interesting collaboration with Notorious Biggie Smalls and his estate, partnering with Burst Live so that people could get into seeing a hyper-realistic model of the late rapper. So some interesting stuff there were many, many more examples, but I thought it was just interesting to look at some of the stuff. So look, I think one of the big questions to ask you when it comes to your marketing is, how would you change your marketing if you set out to link your virtual and your physical assets? Nike have done this really well. They built Nike Land and Roblox, but if you go into the Nike store, you actually on the second floor, they've set the whole thing up so you can actually visit and go into their metaverse experience. You've got AR glasses with Snap, and they've brought those two things together. And what's interesting about this is if you go back to when they launched this, quickly 7 million people had actually visited the store. A few months later, today 21 million. So they're getting some real traction, real traffic. Sephora actually did it in a B2B way. So Sephora is their kind of annual experience for all of their customers on the B2B side, and they actually created that in Roblox this year. And Gucci, I talked about that progression from sell digital products to do a pop-up, to do a persistent space. That's exactly how Gucci played it. And then now at the third of those things, but 35 million visits to Gucci Town inside Roblox. And then when you've also got your space, you need to think about, again, community. How do you get people to keep coming? So they actually created Miley Cyrus as the first ever celebrity avatar on Roblox. Again, a way of bringing people in and driving traffic. Coachella, issuing lifetime passes as NFTs, so using the NFT as a way of connecting to the real world. Tiffany, this was got quite a bit of pushback from the Web3 kind of core community, but super successful, selling out 250 NFTs in 22 minutes of their CryptoPunk necklaces. And Louis Vuitton, the new owners of Tiffany, they've been playing in the space for a while. Really interesting Louis Vuitton NFT game that racked up 2 million downloads really quickly. Clinique doing what many companies are starting to do, which is looking at NFTs as a way of doing CRM and loyalty. Coke using it to leverage their Pride partnership. Many retailers saying they want to be the biggest and the best in the space. So whether it's CVS wanting to be the first pharmacy, or we've heard about Walmart's plans, Carrefour buying land in the Sandbox. And then I thought it was really interesting how big Starbucks have gone in on this. So back in May, they kind of talked about creating the digital third place. Starbucks has always said we're the third place. So you have the home, the office, and Starbucks, which is your third place. And now this is the digital place. And as they said, we believe NFTs have broad potential to create an expanded shared ownership model for loyalty, the offering of unique experiences, community building, and storytelling. And they've literally just put out their NFT-based loyalty program on Polygon. This is literally last week. It's going to be super fascinating to watch how that plays out. And Lowe's, another big retailer, testing 2 different models of virtual stores. And I think one of the things we're seeing is that when you connect real physical worlds with virtual world, you do a lot better. And we talked about the success of the NBA NFTs. The NFL and National Football League have done very similar with Dapper Labs. And what they see is a real sales surge on Sundays when the games are being played. Not exactly unexpected, but confirming what we would think. I think Web3 and the metaverse are going to drive brand purpose, and we've seen a number of examples of that, from the $7 million raised as an NFT of the Ukrainian flag to MAC Cosmetics selling Keith Haring NFTs to drive funding for HIV/AIDS. L'Oreal doing it for their Women of Worth philanthropy. Stella Artois selling NFTs to help their work with Water.org. Balmain and Barbie doing it around DEI. Bacardi selling NFTs that funded Black-owned bars. And this is an interesting example of Homestart, a charity that helps to try and prevent families from being evicted. If you buy for $3,000 an apartment from the metaverse, that will prevent a family being evicted for the year in the real world. We've had Degree doing the world's first ever inclusive marathon in the metaverse, the Metathon, where everybody can take part. And I think we're starting to see a lot of people focus on DEI and representation in and around the metaverse. So whether it's Clinique's Glam Squad, or what Sandbox are doing, where L'Oreal were the first partners in there. We've had digital virtual influencers for a while, and now we have Kami, who is the first virtual influencer with Down syndrome, who's been made up from 100 real people, bringing them together to have the first Down syndrome influencer. Or the other end of it, from people to the planet, Lavazza creating a whole gaming experience to highlight deforestation. People even going as far as trying to make hearing aids acceptable, and removing the stigma through gaming on Roblox. And then I think as we face more and more issues around climate and climate change, the Institute of Digital Fashion's billboard was really interesting. At the end of the world, do you really need more clothes? And that leads into this point that personal identity is increasingly digital. TikTok have just launched their avatars. We're actually TikTok's digital agency in Europe, and we worked on this with them. Facebook, Zuckerberg launched his avatar and very quickly had to upgrade it because everyone said it was terrible. Reddit are saying they're selling collectible avatars. You can also move from avatars to NFTs. Most social platforms now, you can actually share your profile pic as an NFT. And we're seeing people spend more money on digital and virtual goods than goods in the real world. And you probably read about the Gucci handbag that sold for over $4,000 on Roblox. That's more than it costs in the real world.
It's very cute. It's kind of like, I feel like I'm at a museum. Wait, can I touch some of these? Oh my gosh, I can. Look, it's limited. And you can try them on. This is a Gucci GMX.
You get the idea. Gucci have been one of the real pioneers in the space, getting in early. But you know, one of my favorite companies, and I talked about them a lot, and then Nike snapped them up, was Artifact. You know, they would sell $3 million worth of sneakers in 7 minutes. They were really the smartest company in this space. And this whole acquisition really reminds me of when Facebook bought Instagram. You know, this has, in my view, the same kind of potential to be as important to Nike as Instagram was to Facebook. They've launched Crypto Kicks, which are, you know, you buy the base NFT and you have a vial which you can buy to plug in and change the color of the sneaker. So obviously very much like the Gillette system, where once you've got the blade and the handle in someone's hand, you can sell them blades. But I think it's also allowing, you know, Nike to play in spaces they wouldn't have done. So Artifact did a collaboration with Byredo to create perfumes for the metaverse. So actually auras, there were 34 different auras, and each one, you know, was a different color, which showed a different mood. You know, you wouldn't have thought of Nike getting into the fragrance space, and obviously through Artifact they're able to. And some like decent revenue starting to be made by these things. And remember, this is still very much the early days, but you know, in terms of NFT revenue, Nike have made 185 million. Nike and Artifact, we should point out, you know, Dolce & Gabbana 25, Tiffany 12, Gucci 11. So it's starting to get into some real money. And you know, Artifact kind of saying, hey, we're at the start of the avatar economy. Adidas have launched Ready Player Me, the world's first personality-based AI-generated avatars. And this is one of the companies we're investors in. They create metahumans, and this is my metahuman. What's interesting about this isn't that it's particularly great. It's just that this is someone having a conversation with me and AI answering and giving the answers, and I'm not in the room.
Yeah. What do you think about AI?
I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I can use my AI to be able to explain to people.
So I could be a bit more smiley and probably answer quite quicker, but it's quite interesting, that potential. Obviously, the Unreal Engine, the quality of graphics is now quite remarkable. And a lot of this is spilling over, you know, as people look more and more at their digital identities. There's a whole new generation of fashion designers working in code, not cloth. So, you know, all of these outfits you can buy, not to wear in the physical world, but to wear on your profile pic. You know, Zara's launched its first meta collection designed to be worn in the metaverse and beyond. If you looked at the Carolina Herrera fashion show last week, Carly Kloss, the famous supermodel, she walked down the aisle wearing it, but she also stepped down the runway in Roblox, and they created the Klossette, the Carly Kloss in Roblox. Bloomingdale's have gone all in on their virtual store. And as Jing Daly said, you know, Hermes's entry into the metaverse hails a new era for digital luxury fashion. You know, from one end, the high end with Hermes, to, you know, much more basic and accessible. I love this idea. This was Roblox and Target coming together. So at Target, you could buy a T-shirt in collaboration with Roblox, and you could actually have the same avatar in Roblox. So have the same T-shirt in Roblox on your avatar. And if you have a spare $300,000, Dolce & Gabbana have a tiara that you can only wear in the metaverse. But I think, again, in this both and world, both lots of stuff going on and some failures. So first ever Metaverse Fashion Week, 64 brands got involved, pretty much every major brand. And then when you went to it, as you can see from this, it was completely empty. So my joke is that 64 brands got involved and 64 people turned up. Now, we're at the start of something, it's embryonic, you should, you know, innovating is good, but also I think, you know, making sure we're setting expectations about what's really going on. And the global virtual goods market is predicted to be worth 189 billion by 2025. I personally think it'll be worth a lot more than that. Obviously, this whole space comes with a bunch of challenges, and I'll go through these quickly because we lost a bit of time at the start. But you know, security, we've seen all the hacks and all the issues. That's going to start happening at corporate scale. Wallets and chains, if you're going to play in the space, you need a wallet. Which wallet? Hardware, software, hot, cold. What governance, who's responsible for deciding, CEO, CFO, CTO, general counsel, which blockchain do you want to play on, who decides what goes on blockchain, you know, there are many of them, where do you want to play, from Roblox to Decentraland to the Sandbox to Fortnite to Discord to Somnium Space to Zepeto. Where do you want your brand to show up, and who is the expert on knowing whether you should or not? IP, trademarks, and patents. Really interesting, this one, because it's kind of the opposite of the old world. This is all about open IP. Hasn't stopped the Nikes and Hermes and Miramax trying to clamp down on what people are doing in the space. And in fact, Disney put an ad out recently for their first general counsel of the space. And this lawsuit will be fascinating to follow. StockX created NFTs of the Nike sneakers that they sold. Nike said that's unacceptable. StockX have pushed back and said Nike's lawsuit is meritless. They don't understand NFTs. These aren't virtual products. They're tied to a specific physical good rather than being a physical good. We'll see how that plays out. But this is one of the reasons why many companies are filing trademarks in the metaverse. And again, the whole logic, like in the old world, you would say if anybody who owns a Bored Ape can use it to launch their own restaurant or pen or t-shirt, it will totally devalue the franchise, and the franchise will become like the Pierre Cardin of Web3. The Web3 logic is no, because we know exactly who really owns one on the blockchain. And this actually creates huge inherent value, because if you own a real one, you can do lots with it. Data and privacy, all the issues we've had in Web 2, but times 10. Really big issues, sustainability and ESG. How do we solve Bitcoin's carbon problem? Now we're seeing companies, try and crack this. Polygon, the most eco-friendly blockchain, as their positioning, talks about their emissions are the same as 122 passenger vehicles for 1 year. And probably more importantly, Ethereum have just completed a huge and ambitious merge from proof of work to proof of stake. And simplistically, what that does is it cuts the energy used in minting an NFT by 99%. I think if they don't fix the climate issue around this space, it will not ever become big. But I believe personally that technology will take care of that. Big issues around accounting standards and the SEC, more companies jumping in despite the fact that there's no clarity on this. How are cryptocurrencies classified in GAAP financials? Meanwhile, the SEC has doubled the size of its enforcement unit and recently claimed that all of Ethereum falls under US jurisdiction. DEI and responsibilities, there's a lot of bad behavior and harassment and assaults going on in the metaverse. And, the Center for Countering Digital Hate identified 100 of them, infringements of Meta's terms in the metaverse. That's going on the one hand. On the other hand, you have people like Wendy's unveiling their Wendyverse. What are you doing as a brand when people start behaving badly and inappropriately in your spaces in the metaverse? And I think the really big one, immutability. What you put on the blockchain is permanent. This isn't like a seasonal campaign, which if it doesn't work very well, it's gone, it's permanent. And what others do too. So that whole point about Nike StockX, as the subhead says, Nike is asking a court to destroy something that pretty much can't be destroyed. And another horrible example, someone attached a racial slur to an NFT as part of the McDonald's McRib project. That is still there today and cannot be taken down. So in the last kind of 3 minutes, I'll just rattle through where I see the future heading. This is me in the future, and I'll put my my baseball cap on so that you recognize that it's me. So we go into the metaverse. On the left, Snow Crash, the 1993 book from where the term metaverse comes. On the right, our offices in the metaverse. As we set up, the context for the kind of 6 or 7 key points that I believe in the future. Firstly, reminder, trillion-dollar companies are betting that this is the future. So even if you don't think it is, you probably need to have a professional strategy. Secondly, and this includes me, anybody who tells you they know what is going to happen is lying. We have no idea. And I think what you need to do is keep an open mind, a healthy degree of cynicism, innovate, and watch where it's going. But it's really hard to know exactly how it's going to play out. And finally, so I was going to say that if anybody who tells you they know, you should buy them an NFT of a Pinocchio nose. And finally, hype comes before a fall. We've seen enormous hype. We're starting to see the fall, but this whole space will probably be dismissed as being nonsense, and then 12, 18 months later, we'll start to see some really big change. But the fall is definitely coming. So first point, the platforms of Web 2 are unlikely to be the platforms of Web 3. It might seem odd to suggest that the world's biggest companies today are not going to own and be a huge part of Web 3. But those of us who remember Web 1, it was Netscape and Yahoo and AOL and MySpace were the big players. And today we don't talk too much about any of those. So it is unlikely that any of the big players of Web 2 are going to lead in Web 3. One exception, I think, is probably Microsoft. Secondly, the first $10 trillion company is going to come from the metaverse. Wasn't so long ago, we were asking who'd be the first to 1 trillion. Apple got there and got up to 3. But I think the Web 3 world, the metaverse world, is going to give birth to the 10 trillion company. And personally, I think we'll see the death of the mobile phone and the dawn of glasses. The people who crack glasses will be the biggest company in the world. Now, yes, David, I hear you say, but like Google glasses were terrible and Snap glasses aren't too great, nor are the Ray-Ban ones, and that's absolutely right. But look back to the example of the Palm Pilot and the Newton and how poor they were compared to how great the iPhone is. The world's most valuable luxury brand will be virtual and is going to be purpose-driven. We're seeing more and more, as the examples I shared, of people doing really interesting things in the metaverse. And I think the metaverse will turbocharge brand purpose. I wrote a book over a decade ago when it was a little less fashionable about business needing to be a force for good, and the key Venn diagram in that was that making money and doing good didn't need to sit in separate areas, they should come together. And I think the metaverse has a key opportunity to do that. And if in the 20th century we built brands through TV advertising, in the 21st century we'll build brands through how we behave in the metaverse. People are going to seek rare and unique ways to represent themselves, and have already shared a bunch of examples of those. I think we'll also get into interoperability across those platforms. And finally, and the other points I've talked about, whether they happen or not, we'll see. I'm absolutely convinced of this. The future lies at the intersection of the real world, the social world, and the virtual world. And we've spent 10 years perfecting our marketing at the intersection of the real world and the social media world. And we're going to spend the next decade adding the virtual world to that and perfecting our marketing at the intersection of the real world, the social media world, and the virtual world. And I would look at all marketing through that lens today. You can't learn to swim on the shore, so kind of jump in, set up a wallet, work out where your audience is, define the governance, run a meta hack to see where you should be playing, innovate and iterate. WAGMI is an acronym from the Web3 space, which means we're all going to make it. We've kind of pirated that to talk about how we think you should approach jumping into the metaverse. But I think on that note, that gives you a kind of helicopter tour of how we're thinking about it. Enormous amount of things going on, and happy to use the last 15-20 minutes for any questions.
Excellent, David. Thank you for this fascinating presentation. I would like to remind the audience that you can write the questions on the questions panel, and I'll just then direct them to David. But here are some questions already. There are a lot of young users and children in the metaverse. How to protect them from harmful content?
Yeah, look, I think we know how big an issue that was for Web 2 and all the social media platforms. And I think it's an equally big issue for Web 3. My best answer to that, because I think as we've seen with Web 2, the world's governments just aren't smart enough about social media to understand it and to get involved and to be the ones who do it. And we can't necessarily trust the platforms to do it. So I think, we're talking to a group of marketeers. What I would do is have the most significant marketeers in the country get together, sit down with the platforms and say, look, here is what we expect of you if you want us to spend our marketing dollars on your platform. I think by the time that brands started doing that with the big Web 2 platforms, they were too big and too powerful, and we saw boycotts against them that just didn't work because they made most of their revenue not from the big brands, but from the long tail. I think the opportunity, because in the life stage of these platforms, early on they make their money from the big brands, and later on it's from the long tail. So whilst they make their money from the big brands should get together and explain what they expect the platforms to do, how they expect them to head off all of the issues that we saw in Web 2.
Thank you. Which metaverse platform was your avatar in during your closing video? I thought it looked quite sophisticated in comparison to other metaverses I've seen.
It was in Roblox, but you know, you have lots of different options, and I think one of the things we will see is that, you know, avatars at the moment are still fairly basic, and I think if you look at what I showed you with, say, the Unreal Engine, I think that is potentially the kind of quality that, if you want it, we'll be able to end up with in the metaverse.
Okay, and here's a question. Are the current laws and data regulations ready for metaverse, like in UK or in the United States?
No, and they never are. And I think, you know, if you think back to Time magazine, I think 2008, the front cover of Time magazine said, you are the person of the year because you control the digital age. And in fact, we learned that that wasn't true. And there were enormous unintended consequences. You know, I remember watching the documentary, The Social Dilemma, and the person who had invented the like button saying, I just never, you know, I invented this because I thought it was going to spread positivity and good and hope. I never thought it would have these unintended consequences. And so I think, you know, what we've got to try and do is learn from history. And I'm not a naive, you know, optimist saying, oh, it'll all be fine. If not, there are going to be issues. But I think, you know, because we face such big issues with Web 2, from, you know, you raised the whole issue of kids, mental health, you know, elections. I mean, it had a really negative impact on the world in one way, had a very positive impact in another way in terms of bringing people together, but also had a big negative one. And what I am hopeful of is that we will learn the lessons of the past and ensure that we head that off, because we've kind of had a warning now. You know, we've seen how Web 2 played out, and it's our responsibilities to kind of try and ensure that Web 3 doesn't play out that way. But there are going to be unintended consequences for sure. And our governments just are nowhere near smart and sophisticated enough to understand these platforms and how they should be getting involved and regulating.
Right, and then getting back to Roblox, do you think Roblox is the most engaging and exciting metaverse at the moment?
Yeah, no, look, I do personally. I mean, I think as with many of these things, you know, the future will tell us which one wins. I mean, again, I made the point, but MySpace was dramatically bigger than Facebook, and not too many people are talking about MySpace anymore. So there's a number of things that have to happen for a platform to become the kind of the one. But I think what I like about Roblox is just the audience, the engagement of the audience. 40 million games have been built and created on Roblox by its users. So on the one hand, they've got a big audience, but also starting to do some really interesting stuff in the brand space. So yeah, my personal, you know, Minecraft and Fortnite are pretty big franchises too. But then on the other side, you know, you only need a Sandbox or a Decentraland to start scaling and building their audience, and they could easily emerge as the future platform, because the advantage they have when it comes to the future is that they're actually built on the blockchain, whereas Roblox isn't. It's very much a Web 2 platform. But yeah, if you said to me, what's my favorite metaverse platform, I'd say Roblox.
All right, thank you. And then, in your opinion, what's the up and coming or most innovative commercial brand, for example, Nike that you mentioned, in NFT Web3 game? What is the brand that you anticipate the next interesting thing will come from?
Yeah, look, I mean, I often think the most interesting thing comes from, you know, unexpected places. I mean, I've been talking about Artifact for sort of 18 months because they were doing such innovative stuff. And and then Nike bought them. But I think they're just really interesting in how well they get it. So I would say, if you're looking at the new brands, I think Artifact. If you're looking at the established brands, I think Gucci's approach has been really smart and really clever. You know, they didn't go diving in, you know, they've gone and very considered. They started selling products and they did really well doing that. They sold a handbag for over $4,000, and then they did a pop-up space, and that was really successful. And now they've done their persistent space. I think what's going to actually be interesting with Gucci is, can they keep the interest around that persistent space? But yeah, I mean, I think often it's like Gap's hoodie was great, you know, it was really smart. I think it's often the little things from unexpected places.
Thank you. The many examples you showed were kind of a luxury brands like Gucci and so on. How do you see the marketing for common people establishing itself in the metaverse?
Yeah, look, I think it's an easy default. So yeah, it's okay for luxury brands, but not everyone else. But you know, if you actually go through the examples, there was, you know, big retailers like Walmart and Lowe's and Carrefour. You know, you've got everyday coffee companies like Starbucks. You know, you had the car companies, and in each of these things, there's a limit to how many examples I can show you. But in the car space, you've literally got, you know, 20 different car brands doing stuff. So I think it is a mistake to go, well, you know, that's okay for the luxury brands and the fashion brands, but it's not for me. Clearly, it is easy for the fashion and the luxury brands, or easier, because, you know, you can dress you in the real world and you can dress your avatar. So that gives them a head start. But likewise, I think you're going to see, and you're already starting to see, more and more brands, actually everyday brands, getting involved. And I think, you know, my parallel would be when, you know, we had a question once, we were talking to a food company, and they sort of said, yeah, but you know, you can't taste and smell food in the metaverse. And my answer was, yeah, but you can't taste and smell food on television either, can you? Yeah. We've had, you know, enormous amounts of money very successfully spent behind marketing food brands on television and television commercials. We've had enormous amounts of money spent on cooking shows and food programs. And so, you know, I think what we always need to do is kind of take a step back and go, oh, actually, yeah, no, maybe that's right. We often judge the new technology and say that will never work because, and then if you take a step back, well, actually, that was totally true of when television came along and you couldn't taste and smell food on television.
Exactly. Here's a follow-up question. What is the audience at the moment, for example, for Gucci? Are the collectors buying the NFTs or just rich gamers? And how do you see this changing in the future?
Yeah, look, it's a really good question. I mean, you know, depending upon the platform, so Roblox skews young, you know, 50% of under 18-year-olds in North America are on Roblox. Their fastest growing vertical, however, is over 18. And when you look into some of the amounts of money being spent on NFTs, you know, $250,000, $300,000 for, you know, a Dapper Labs NBA Top Shot NFT, you know, there aren't too many kids who are spending that kind of money. I think the most important point to think about, though, here is one of the huge mistakes I think we make as humans is we judge the future based on the present. And, you know, just a silly example, my wife came to live in London. I'm a Brit. I live in New York, married to a French woman. My wife came to live in London back in the 90s, and she worked on a thing called Iridium. And this was a telephone that worked anywhere in the world. It came with a suitcase. It would cost $300,000, and you could telephone. If you went to New York, you had your own phone that worked. Now, like we all have those today, you know, there are 7 billion of them. And I think to make the mistake of thinking that because something is, you know, someone said to me, is the metaverse currently, or NFTs and Web3, the domain of the 1%? And it's like, when you come to the NFT space, yeah, it's the domain of the subset of the 1%, because people who are spending that kind of money on NFTs, you know, are very wealthy people. But that's going to change, you know. The mobile phone today, there are 7 billion people who have mobile phones and 6 billion who have smartphones. And so over time, this is going to become much more accessible, and just the way the market grows and expands, it will become democratized, and it won't be the kind of home of the subset of the 1%.
Thank you so much, David. I think we're kind of running out of time, and all the questions that you've written were actually here. We thank you, David, so much. This was really refreshing and future-oriented presentation. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. I'm glad to join you digitally from New York and to come to Finland for an hour or so. Yeah, excellent. Yes, but thank you for the audience also. And we actually have a metaverse themed webinar on Tuesday also. So please, that's in Finnish, but you're all very welcome. Thanks again, and have a great day in New York, David. And take care. Bye bye.
Yeah. Bye bye.